Hey guys, Fletch Football Observer here, and today's Fletch Talks video is going to centre around the news that broke last night and has carried over and developed further into this morning. And I am of course talking about the news that Mauricio Pochettino has been sacked by Tottenham and has been replaced almost immediately by one Jose Mourinho. Yes, the news broke last night at around 6:45 on the 19th of November that Spurs had sacked Mauricio Pochettino with immediate effect. What followed was a statement from Chairman Daniel Levy and Tottenham themselves. He had the club's best interest at heart. That is basically the message that he put into the statement. He said he had the club's best interests at heart, and that although it wasn't an easy decision for him to make, he had to make such a big decision. Pochettino, of course, took over in 2014 at Spurs, and during his time with the club, he led them to 4 top 4 finishes out of the 5 full seasons that he spent with the club. He also got them to a couple of FA Cup semi-finals, as well as last season's Champions League final. But of course, we all know that Tottenham did finish runners-up in that competition. This season, though, it hasn't quite panned out as well. He leaves Tottenham in 14th place in the table with only 3 wins, 5 draws and 4 losses from their opening 12 games. A subplot to this is they've had no away league win since January against the now championship side Fulham. That was their last away win in the Premier League. But of course they do have a very good standing in the Champions League. They are pretty much through. They are 1 win away from making that a certainty to the knockout stages. So Spurs are looking pretty good in that competition. But it's the Premier League that they are more worried about. And of course, the Champions League wasn't seen as enough for Pochettino to keep his job. Now, to be honest, in my opinion, I honestly could see this coming from a mile off. I honestly thought that towards the back end of last season, you could see that things were starting to fall off, so to speak. Things were starting to end, I thought. I thought this little project of Pochettino was coming towards an end, and I think you could see that in some of the performances and results that Spurs were picking up in the Premier League. Now, of course, you can caveat that with the fact that obviously Spurs were chasing Champions League glory at the time, so maybe they had bigger things on their mind than the Premier League itself. But Spurs only just managed to get top 4 last season. They almost took their eye off the ball completely in the league. And if it wasn't for some poor results from the likes of both Arsenal and Manchester United, who are also in the running for top 4, Spurs could have easily fallen out of that kind of top 4 area. So they got very lucky in that respect. But of course, like I say, they did have Champions League, so maybe you could caveat that, I suppose. But then going into this season, it's just got worse. Some of the results, some of the performances have been very, very poor. And to be honest, you know, the Champions League is where I think he would have liked to have ended it. If he'd have won the Champions League, I think he would have walked away. But I think not winning the Champions League and not even putting in I mean, it wasn't a very good Champions League final, let's be honest. But not even putting in the sort of good performance by his team, I think it kind of made him more determined to stay on and see if he could actually rectify that kind of mistake or that kind of patch on his on his career. But of course it wasn't to be, as hindsight proves. And since then there's just been a lot of trouble at Spurs. You look at players that are entering the last year of their contracts, big players at that, you know, your Alderweireld, your Vertonghen's, your Christian Eriksen's, all seemingly wanting to move on. They don't seem interested. You've got players playing there that head seen elsewhere. They don't want to be there. They want to be moving on. They've seen that this Tottenham thing is probably coming towards the end of its time, and everyone is just looking to seemingly move on. He's playing players that are either not good enough or just don't seem interested at all in fighting for the cause. There's also been reports over the past few months of friction between players over training ground bust-ups and not getting along, and this all seems very similar. And the one thing I will point out is this seems very similar to the way that Arsene Wenger's time at Arsenal came to an end. When Arsene Wenger was coming to an end at Arsenal, you heard of multiple training ground bust-ups, you heard of multiple players not wanting to be at the club, having arguments with each other. It just drew parallels to that, I think. Of course, as always, when a breaking news story breaks like this, many social media fans, or many fans jump on social media to comment on this story. I'm another one like that, so no judgment. And there's been two sort of angles, I suppose you'd say, to this. Many fans have claimed that this is a big club mentality thing by Tottenham. They've shown big club mentality in the fact that something has gone wrong and they decided to take action. And that action is very cutthroat, it's very ruthless, but at the same time, it's something that they thought needed to be done, and the fans are applauding the club for doing that, for taking that ruthless step in protecting the club's best interests. However, others, and some big pundits alike, including Jamie Carragher, have said that this is a display of disrespect from Tottenham to get rid of a manager who's done so much for the club over his time and took them to that next level. It really shouldn't have been this way. It should have at least been till the end of the season. And the fact that he's been sacked as well is just a clear indication that this wasn't mutual consent. It's sacked. The club have gone to him and said, you're no longer wanted at this club. You're gone. And that's just how it is. And I think that I can see both sides of that argument. Of course, his success wasn't measured in terms of silverware, but in terms of his achievement. His achievement was to take Spurs to the next level. And I feel like he did that. He achieved that. Before he took over, they were hovering around top 4. They were top 4 contenders. They were getting towards top 6 pretty much every season. He came in. He took them to that next level. He made them a regular top 4 figure. He made them a regular team within them places. And I think he needed to be applauded for that, especially being on the kind of budget he was. He was nowhere near going to be able to manage the budget or be able to match the budget of a Manchester United or a Manchester City. He did very well to use whatever he had at his disposal, whether it was finding players within his youth setup or whether it was finding hidden gems elsewhere. He did very well in his scouting and everything along them lines to get the best kind of players and the more suitable players to his system that Tottenham could afford. Like I say, I personally see this from both angles. I can see that the big club mentality thing is a big thing in football now, especially because you're not going to get eras like Sir Alex Ferguson or Arsene Wenger. They're not going to be them kind of managers again where they're hanging on to 20 years of a legacy or whatever. You're going to get managers now that are going to have probably 6-7 years at most now. You're getting towards that era now where it's very cutthroat. It's very much like success. You're based on winning trophies pretty much instantly. You get a few years, and if there's no signs of improvement, you're gone. The bigger the club, the bigger that kind of ideology is. And that's just how it is now. That's just how it is. Like I said, you're not going to get the Sir Alex Ferguson, Arsene Wenger kind of eras. You're going to get that kind of thing. And I can see that, but I can also see that, personally, I like Pochettino. I think he's a good manager. I think things were coming to an end there, but I think that he had built up a reputation, a love for the club. The fans obviously loved him, and he took them to that next level where he could have basically called time on the club in his own way. As long as he wasn't taking the mick with it and wasn't dragging it out too long, I don't think there would have been a problem with him going, you know what, give it to the end of the season. I don't think Tottenham were ever going to go down. There was no chance of a relegation despite their low status in the table right now. They weren't going to go down, so we might as well stay to the end of the season. Yes, you probably might have missed out on Champions League with the way that things are going. Europa League, probably at a push if things manage to kick on in a certain way later on in the season, but a cup run maybe? Who knows? So I can kind of see it from both angles, really. The timing of the sacking seemed a little strange at first, I thought if he was to go, it would be during the international break, but once the international break is now seemingly over and players are starting to return to their clubs, I thought he managed to get away with it. Obviously, that isn't the case, and 12 hours after it was announced, he was sacked. Jose Mourinho has been announced as his successor. Jose Mourinho, of course, a well-known figure in football. Jose Mourinho managed some of the biggest clubs, the best clubs in Europe. He returns to the Premier League as manager of Tottenham Hotspur, succeeding Mauricio Pochettino. And to be honest, I personally think this is a very good appointment by Tottenham. I think he'll be a welcome addition, not only to the Premier League season that's currently happening, and obviously going forward if he manages to make it that far, but I think it will be a good appointment for the club itself. We all know Jose. We all know he's a character. Like him or not, you know he's a character that you just can't take your eyes off. Because, let's face it, everywhere he goes, it's the Jose show. It's the Mourinho show. Like it or not, he is a character that makes you want to watch him. Whether it's for all the good or all the bad reasons, he makes you want to watch him. Now, maybe it will overshadow the club. And maybe it's not a good appointment in that respect. But for him as a character, being outspoken, being controversial, being unpredictable, charismatic, he's exactly the kind of character the Premier League needs. So I'm happy in this respect that he's back in the Premier League managing at some level. He will, of course, provide that instant shot of adrenaline to both him, the club, and then obviously the league itself. I think that's a given. I think we all know that of him. His time at United, of course, was seen as being poor, you know. But then in hindsight, you look at it and think, actually, maybe he actually did overachieve with the squad he had, the money he wasn't allowed to spend. He did obviously some flaws, too defensive, his favouritism. But if you look at the squad he's got to work with here, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good squad that he's inherited. And like I say, I just genuinely think that he'll be a good influence on maybe some of the younger players in this squad, maybe even some of the older players too, because let's face it, he prefers to work with some of the older players that are more produced. There's not very much more to work with there. They've reached a peak, so to speak. You know, you're looking at the likes of Vertonghen, Alderweireld, Christian Eriksen, in particular Kane, Harry Kane, of course. If they can get them to stay, if he can get them to stay, then he can definitely have a lot to work with in terms of experience, in terms of big game players, in terms of quality players. So he's got a lot to work with there if he can keep them kind of players to stay. Hugo Lloris as well is another one. And of course then he's got some younger players that he can work with and he can attempt to sort of build up and help along further with the likes of Harry Winks, Tanguy Ndombele, Dele Alli, just a few names there to shout out. But like I was saying, he's a complete character. He is exactly what the Premier League needs. May not be the kind of character Tottenham need right now, but as far as him as a manager, helping them kind of players, building a squad with what he's going to be given, what he's got, and what he can actually achieve at that club is going to be something that may take a year or so. And he's not really a long-term manager, hence why he's been given the usual Mourinho type of 3-year deal, which means that he'll probably be there until 2023. Is actually a very good appointment, I think, for the short term. I think for the short term it is, because he's a guy that can really steady the ship. Tottenham want right now a guy to steady the ship. They want him to steady the ship and breathe new life into this Tottenham squad that seemingly has been going a bit stale for the past, well, I'd say from the past calendar year, to be honest, it's been going a bit stale. But he will breathe new life into it and simultaneously breathe new life into the Premier League as well. And to me, this appointment makes complete sense. I personally like this appointment from Tottenham. I don't agree necessarily with the way that they've gone about it, but I think with all the other options out there that were being talked about, your Eddie Howe's, your Rafa Benitez, I think this was possibly the most sensible choice, possibly the right choice. Only time will tell on that one. I'm excited for him to be back in the Premier League, to be honest. Like, yes, he does moan a lot, but he's a character, and I think that's the main sort of thing I'm vibing off here. I'm not a Tottenham fan, and some of the Tottenham fans that I'm talking to, they've said that maybe if he learns from his time at United and him being too defensive and his favouritism of certain players, maybe he can turn things around here. And maybe he can. Maybe he can. Maybe he will change and evolve with the times, and maybe you'll get a very good Mourinho at Tottenham. Like I say, I personally am happy about this, and I'm not even a Tottenham fan. I'm happy that Mourinho is back in the Premier League to an extent. You know, he does my head in with his moaning at times, and just some of the things that he comes out with are completely bizarre, but I think as a character, he's what the Premier League needs. And I think for right now, as a character, for that initial boost, that initial sort of entrance, he will be the boost to this Tottenham squad that will see them through to the remainder of this season. And then beyond that, who knows? It will depend on if he's allowed to have a pretty hefty transfer budget. It will depend on who he gets to stay, who he wants to stay, and who he wants to get rid of. Tottenham do have assets to sell, so if he's prepared to maybe sacrifice a couple of big players, maybe he could get a lot more money from that. Main thing is, he builds a squad, he rebuilds it, breathes new life into this squad, and then he can go on and make Tottenham a force, an even bigger force in the Premier League once again. Guys, this is just one man's thoughts and one man's opinions on this particular subject. What do you think? Do you think it was right of Tottenham to get rid of Pochettino? Should he have been given more time? What do you think of the appointment of Jose Mourinho? Is he the right man for the job? Or would you have liked to have seen anybody else take this role? And what does the season now hold in store for Tottenham and Jose Mourinho? I would love to get your thoughts, comments, opinions, whatever, down in the comment section below. That would be great. Hit that like button on the way out, guys, if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're new or want to see more content like this. Both things will be greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening. I've been Fletch, the Football Observer. This has been another Fletch Talks video, and I will see and speak with you all again soon in another video.